Greetings. We will discuss about assessment procedures which focus to anecdotal records. Many outcomes in the cognitive domain, such as those pertaining knowledge, understanding, and thinking skills, can be measured by a paper and pencil test or performance-based assessment. However, there are also many important learning outcomes require informal observation of natural interactions in the classroom, on the playground, or in the lunchroom. So through this presentation, we will discuss the use of anecdotal records to systematically accumulate information from teachers' informal observations. We will focus on procedures for observing and recording students' performance in natural setting throughout the school year. Learning outcomes in skills areas and behavior changes in personal social development are especially difficult to assess with paper and pencil tests. So, performance-based tasks of skill like this at the top of the table could be done by authentic and alternative assessment. Yes, but the other outcomes such work habits, social, scientific, academic, self-concept, interest, appreciations is only, it's required the use of informal observation techniques that can improve the assessment of all these outcomes. So learning outcomes and aspect of development can generally be assessed by these three strategies. But we are going to discuss deep about anecdotal records. The use of anecdotal records can turn informal teacher observations into systematic source of information about student development. So, although these observational techniques are more subjective than we'd like, and their use frequently require more time and effort than typical assessment procedure, they are the best means available for assessing a variety of important behavior. Our choice is simple. Either we use these techniques to assess its learning outcomes and aspect of development of behavior, or we just neglect learning outcomes that cannot be measured by paper and pencil tests. Anecdotal records are factual descriptions of the meaningful incidents and events that the teacher has observed. It informs teachers as they plan learning experiences, provide information to families, and give insights into identifying possible development delays. So teachers' daily observations give them a wealth of information concerning the learning and development of their students. For example, third grade teacher noticed during oral reading that Mike mispronounced several simple words. Maria sits staring out the window. Carl keeps interrupting the reading with irrelevant questions. Such daily incidents and events have special significance for assessing student learning and development. They enable us to determine how a student typically performs or behaves in a variety of situations. A simple and convenient method of doing this is through anecdotal records. Such records reduce problems caused by selective memory and can be useful not only in planning ways to interact more effectively with individual students, but also in preparing for PTC or parent-teacher conference. This is the specific example recorded on anecdotal records can provide more effective basis for communication with parents than mere generalities. So each incident should be written down shortly after it happens. A good anecdotal record keeps the objective descriptions of an incident separate from any interpretations of the behavior's meaning. The use of anecdotal records has frequently been limited to the area of social adjustment. Anecdotal records can be used for obtaining data pertinent to variety of learning outcomes and to many aspects of personal and social development. The potential usefulness of the anecdotal method is revealed in the various areas of learning outcomes. Presented earlier, as you will have seen that many of the behavior listed only can be praised by means of direct observation. What is the advantage? Probably the most important advantage is that they depict actual behavior in natural situations. The old says, actions speak louder than words, had a direct application here. A student may show good knowledge of health practice but violate them in everyday situations. One may profess great interest in science but approach laboratory work in haphazard and uninterested fashion, or may express great concern for the welfare of others but behave in selfish manner. Second is, in addition to a compiling description of the most characteristic behavior of students, anecdotal records facilitate gathering evidence and that are exceptional but significant. Typical examples are quiet student who speak in class for the first time, the hostile student who makes a friendly gesture, the extreme conformist who shows a sign of originality, and the apathetic student who shows a spark of interest. The third, anecdotal records can be used with very young students and with students who have limited basic communication skills. They are especially valuable in situations where paper and pencil tests, performance assessments, self-report techniques, and peer appraisals are likely to be impractical or limited use by the young. So observational records of younger students are of value for still another reason, because young children tend to be more spontaneous and uninhibited in their actions. Their behavior is often easier to observe than interpreted. What behaviors to observe and record? In general, our objectives and desired outcomes will guide us in determining what behaviors are most worth noting. We must also be alert to those unusual and exceptional incidents that contribute to a better understanding of each student's unique pattern of behavior. So within this general framework, several steps such as confining our observations to those areas of behavior that cannot be assessed by other means, limiting our observations of all students at any given time to just a few types of behavior. And lastly, restricting the use of extensive observation of behavior to those few students who are most in need of special need. Records of actual behavior are best to assess how student typically behaves in natural setting. How does David approach a problem? How persistent is Rachel carrying a task? How willing is Steve to listen the ideas of others? What contribution does Kwang make to class activities? How willing is Christine to participate in games with other children in the playground? So, a student's verbal comments and actions in various natural situations reveal certain clues to attitude, interest, appreciations, habits, and adjustment patterns that cannot be discovered by any other means. So these are types of behavior on which we should focus when keeping anecdotal records. The best we can hope to get from anecdotal record is a fairly representative sample of student behavior in different areas for which we want information. This usually can be obtained more easily if we concentrate our observation on a few areas at a time. For example, an elementary teacher might pay particular attention to reading interest during free reading period, to signs of appreciation during music and art, and to patterns of social relation during recess. In addition, to recording some information on all students, there are times when we need more comprehensive information regarding a relative view. The child is struggling to learn to read. The socially rejected child, the disruptive child, and the child with learning disability are typical of those needing special attention. So more extensive observation of such students are helpful in understanding their difficulties and in planning effective instructional strategies. The most complete and useful information is obtained when we concentrate our observation on one or two students at a time. So during such observations, it also may be necessary to restrict our record keeping on other students. Some teachers may be discouraged when they first use anecdotal records because they attempt to do too much. So by limiting observation and reports to specific types of behavior, to specific students, or both, is frequently necessary to make procedure feasible. It is much better to have a clearly delimited and workable observational plan than to end up with an incomplete and atypical collection of unrelated incidents. Some limitations of anecdotal records could be the time or effort required to maintain an adequate record system. This can be offset somewhat by limiting observation and report. Record keeping is still a time-consuming task. Another series is the difficulty of being objective when observing and reporting student behavior. Yes, ideally we would like a series of verbal snapshots that accurately represent the student actual behavior. For example, they tend to notice more desirable qualities in those students they like best and more undesirable qualities in those they like least. If they believe that boys are less well coordinated than girls, they will tend to perceive that performance skills as being lower quality than girls. So training in observation and reporting can reduce such distortion to a minimum, but they cannot be eradicated entirely. They must be on guard against self-fulfilling prophecies, especially in cases where immediate impressions lead to low expectation of individual students. Here are suggestions for the effective use of anecdotal reports. First is determine in advance what to observe, but be alert for unusual behavior. Analyze observational records for possible sources of bias. Observe and record enough of the situation to make the behavior meaningful. Make record of the incidents as soon as after the observation as possible. Limit each anecdote to a brief description of a single incident. 6. Keep the factual description of the incident and your interpretation of it separate. Record both positive and negative behavioral incidents, so both, and collect a number of anecdotes on student behavior before drawing inferences concerning typical behavior. Yes, practice makes perfect, so often practice in writing anecdotal reports. There are some guidelines how to write anecdotal reports. Write brief, specific description. Include a concise description on what the student said or did in the situation with each occurred. Do not write generalized descriptive anecdotes, nor evaluative anecdotes, nor interpretative anecdotes. So, the conclusion, observational techniques are especially useful in assessing performance skill and certain aspects of personal social development. The least structure of observational technique is anecdotal report. The limitation can be minimized by following specific procedure for observing and recording the behavioral incidents. And a good anecdotal record keeps the objective description of an incident separate from any interpretations of the behavior's meaning. Thank you.